Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yusrel and welcome to a guide for the Vault Ensnared. This is a space scenario that requires 5 players, consists of 3 phases, takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes to run, and rewards a choice of Nukara, Romulan and Fleet marks with the exact quantity depending on how well you do and whether or not the mark bonus event is running when you open the claim box. We'll come to the mission itself in a bit, however, because the prep work for this mission has a fairly major impact on how well you'll do. The main opposition in this mission consists of a number of individually weak swarms of Tholians that are relatively spread out and need to be disposed of in a fairly tight time limit. The mission therefore emphasises speed and firepower over defence and clever tricks. In other words, leave the science ships at home. Cannon-armed cruisers, especially top-of-the-line ships like the Scimitar, can do pretty well with careful piloting and judicious use of engine braking, but the ideal ship for this scenario is an escort, raptor or bird of prey. Similarly, the bridge officer choice is affected by the mission's setup. Swarms of smaller enemies make area firepower a must, so load scatter volley, torpedo spread and fire at will as appropriate. You'll also need counters for the Tholians' preferred party tricks, polarised hull and attack pattern omega to break tracked beams, engineering team and emergency power, especially emergency power to weapons to keep the systems online, and a way of breaking web orbs. Romulan players have it easy here, singularity jump will teleport you straight through an orb, but Klingon and Federation players need other options. If you've got a beam bank loaded, then fire at will automatically target web nodes. Cannon and torpedo fire will work, but it requires mouse targeting, since tab targeting of nodes seems a little iffy, to say the least. Scatter volley and torpedo spread, unfortunately, require a locked primary target and valid line of fire to work, which is why you need to target manually with these weapons. A slightly less conventional option is tractor repulsors, which will automatically target and then break a web node with a couple of pulses, even at low auxiliary power. To quote the General, on board a starship, everything is a weapon. As for devices, weapon batteries are handy to have, allowing for better firepower immediately out of full impulse, and yes, restarting a disabled weapons grid, as are engine batteries if you need a burst of speed in Phase 2. Beyond that, select to personal taste. With all that taken into account, meet the Never Sail. Those of you who've seen the Next to No Budget Escort video that I made a few weeks back should be familiar with her, and if you aren't, check the annotation for a detailed look at the build, not to mention a breakdown of where to get the parts. Back? Good. You'll notice I've swapped out transfer shield for tractor repulsors and emergency power to shields for emergency power to weapons. I've got no shield healing except for passive on this build, but that shouldn't matter a great deal in this scenario since the incoming damage is going to be so low. So, after warping in, you get about a minute to orientate yourself. There are 3 things you need to do in this phase. Firstly, set your weapon power so it's capped. Use whatever base setting you need for 125 or 130 power with the right core, and shunt just about everything else to the engines. Second, set full impulse. Third, start talking to your teammates. No, seriously, start talking to your teammates. Once Phase 1 kicks off, you'll have 10 groups in a rough circle around the vault, and 5 minutes in which to clear as many of them as possible. The groups are small and weak enough that they can be soloed or duoed in fairly short order, and there is definitely no need to keep the team together. The basic concept, therefore, is for 2 or 3 team members to go left, and 3 or 2 to go right. Really firepower-heavy teams may even split 4 or 5 ways. And outside the unlikely scenario that all 5 members of the team are psychic, communication is really the only way to ensure that you don't trip over each other. So fire up the communications console. Yes, that one. The one with the inch of dust on it. Phase 1 kicks off and is straight out of the blocks at full impulse. Since the power is already redirected to the engines, full speed is reached in a couple of seconds rather than 7 or 8. If you're in an escort or something with a similar inertia value, and thus very quick accelerations, then you can disengage full impulse at about 12 kilometers and let momentum carry you into range while setting up the attack run. Make sure to use weapon battery, by the way. Your weapon power will be low and you'll need it back up fairly quickly. Heavier ships, particularly ones that stop somewhere after the third moon of Jagal and Beta, would normally dump from impulse further out in order to avoid overshooting the targets, but this wastes precious seconds. However, there is a very handy trick that can best be described as engine braking. Instead of just pressing Shift R, you will instead tap R, immediately press Shift R, and then either tap R again for full throttle or double tap E for half. This uses the bonus acceleration from full impulse to stop the ship, disengages impulse immediately after, and then gets you moving at more normal speeds. It's a bit trickier to pull off, but it allows you to stop even the heaviest of ships in a relatively short distance. And it's a bit trickier in this case because you'll simultaneously be triggering your weapon skills, a weapon battery to quickly get the main guns back up to something approaching decent power levels, and possibly an attack pattern and decloaking into the bargain, so you might need some quick finger work. Once you've shredded the first group, it's on to the second. Since you don't want to waste time waiting for the red alert to end and full impulse to come back online, hit evasive manoeuvres, and if you've got something that boosts engine power, emergency power, augs to battery, a suitable capacitor on your reactor core, engage that as well to get a quick boost of near full impulse speed without the power drain. It probably won't get you all the way there, and you'll wind up using full impulse to complete the hop, but it means less time with full impulse and thus less power transferred away from the weapons. You arrive at the second group and shred the second group. Move on to the third group. Rinse and repeat until you run out of Tholians, Remans or time, but do note that 2 of the groups are in the Micronebula on this map. The good news is that the Tholian shields won't work, they'll be even squishier than usual. The bad news is that full impulse doesn't work in the nebula either. Thankfully, evasive manoeuvres does, so mix that and, yes, possibly a judicious boost to engine power to take the shortest route out of the nebula when you're done. Usually that'll mean just doing a straight 180, but if you get yourself disorientated, just steer for the vault. With Phase 1 done, it's on to Phase 2. You'll get a 30-second pause in the action to sort out the team's planning, and yep, there's more communication needed. You did dust off that console, right? The situation in this phase is that 3 layers, for want of a better term, of Vault Weavers will warp in and begin orbiting the Vault, weaving a large web as they go. The further they are allowed to travel, the lower the reward you will get. The reward decreases every 20% closer the Tholians get to completing the web, so of course the Vault Weavers all have to die. The optimum strategy seems to be 1 person per layer of Vault Weavers, low, mid and high, with the remaining 2 players floating and taking out Mesh Weaver groups. Viewed from above the Vault, the Weavers will always orbit clockwise, so the 3 players chasing them down should orbit anti-clockwise. That way the Weaver's movement helps rather than hinders your efforts to intercept them, and again it saves precious seconds in hunting them down. The Weaver trails are visible from a longer range than usual, and if done right, you should finish an orbit of the Vault just as the replacement for your first victim warps in and the next orbit begins. If things do go wrong, it is down to the floaters to intervene, and this cannot be stressed enough. If the ships assigned to individual layers go off mission, it does tend to lead to a bad case of disaster dominoes. A concept that's worth mentioning here is the constant bearing intercept. Essentially, if you're heading towards a target and it is at a constant bearing to you, you are on an optimum interception course. The application here is that if you keep a constant camera angle, then the Vault Weaver you are trying to intercept should not appear to change its position relative to you, although it will of course appear to get bigger as you get closer. If that's the case, you are on the quickest course to weapons range for your current speed. If the Weaver's bearing is changing, then steer in the direction of the drift to compensate. Complicating matters are the packs of Mesh Weavers and Widow Fighters dotted around. These aren't a threat as such, but getting tangled in one of these is a distraction from the Vault Weavers, and by keeping the Weaver interception ships from engaging full impulse to get to their next target, slows the team down, allows the Weavers to live longer, travel further, and therefore rob you of marks. Romulan and Klingon birds of prey have battle cloaks, and thus the easiest solution to blundering into one of these packs for a Vault interception is to cloak up, soak a few relatively inconsequential hits, and wait for the red alert to drop. Everyone else, well, the simplest solution is not to blunder into the pack in the first place. But if a Weaver is in the middle of said pack, then consider diving in, killing the Weaver, and then blowing evasive manoeuvres, engine power boosts, tractor counters and or tractor repulsors to dash out the other side and leave the little nuisances hanging. Another option is to feed them a distraction. Photonic fleet if you're a science captain, Nimbus reinforcements, fighters or similar, while you leg it to the next target. If the Weavers are under control, then the floaters can entertain themselves and make things much easier for the Weaver groups by just blowing these guys away. Two final points for this phase. The first is that the middle orbit goes through the micronebula, and all the comments from phase 1 apply here as well. Get in, kill the target, and then get out of the nebula as fast as possible, even if this isn't initially an intercept course for the next Weaver. The second comment is that this phase has a fixed time limit before the web collapses and we move on to phase 3. Phase 3 starts with a cutscene to cover the game setting up the phase itself. Once it finishes, you will be about 50 kilometers from the Vault, facing two groups of Tholians that are about 30 kilometers out from you. One of these will be a Tarantula battleship, with various other Tholian vessels in attendance, and the other will be a named Tarantula on its own. Hit this lone Tarantula first. It will walk away after a few minutes, and take 3 bonus marks and potentially 5 fleet marks with it. And beside that, the phase is really just a bit of cathartic violence. Kill off the named battleship and then wipe out the group to finish the scenario. You'll get a bit of help from the Riemann ships you saved in phase 1, but even without them, 5 players should be able to tear the Tholian packs to shreds in short order. And that's it for both the scenario and this guide. The marked boxes will automatically appear in your inventory, so all you have to do is loot up and warp out. I have been Yusril, that has been a look at the Vault Ensnared, and I'll see you in space.